Hey guys, once again, I have the Captain Dork video headset on, which means it's time for another demo, okay? So today we're going to be demoing the drill press. Now before I demo the drill press, as always, I do want to take a minute to talk about PPEs. The first PPE I want to talk about is obviously glasses. You always have your glasses on. The second one you always want to wear, obviously, is your hearing protection earplugs. The third one that you want to wear is actually gloves. Now I do want to take a minute to talk about gloves because gloves are great for setting up the machine. However, when you're actually operating the drill press, you do not want to wear gloves. And the reason why is because gloves are considered to be a loose clothing item and they can actually get caught in a rotating machine such as a drill press. So you want to make sure that whenever you're operating the drill press, you actually remove your gloves and then you actually operate the machine without your gloves. So make sure you take your gloves off when you're actually operating the machine. But when it comes to setting the machine up, you can actually leave your gloves on. In fact, I recommend it for using material, for setting everything up, putting it in place. So make sure it is a good idea to have your gloves on. The first thing I want to talk about before we actually do our drill press is we actually want to set this thing up and we want to make sure that we're marking your material correctly. So I want to take a minute to talk about, actually before I even talk about that, I want to talk about the drill press itself, okay? Now the drill press, ours is set up with a cross feed vise on it. This cross feed vise allows us to hold material tightly and securely in the vise and allows for nice fine adjustments using the cross feed screws on the vise. We also have our main clamp here, which allows us to actually clamp down a material, but we'll get to that here in a second. The next thing I want to bring up on the drill press is the actual spindle itself. Now this spindle has what's called a Morse taper adapter. Now what does that mean? What a Morse taper adapter does is it allows us to actually put different Morse taper adjustments in the drill. Now sometimes what happens is the chuck will actually remove right from the drill. But if you need to remove the chuck from the drill, you actually use what's called a Morse taper wedge. This is a Morse taper wedge. The way this operates is you're going to pull the spindle down until you have this slot right here. You see the slot all the way through? I will then stick the Morse taper wedge into the slot, and I'm going to use my hammer. I'm going to gently tap the Morse taper wedge until chuck comes out. Now, it's important to note that this chuck is meant to come out. If this does not come out, then it's probably stuck in the machine. And this is a very specific designed chuck. What the Morse taper design chuck is meant to do, it's meant to have what's called a slip fit chuck. That means that this thing actually has a tapered fit not only here, but inside the collar, inside the drill press as well. I want you to notice that the Morse taper chuck looks different than a standard straight shank drill. The Morse taper shank is tapered. Your straight shank drill is straight. There is a difference, meaning that if you find a drill bit that has the Morse taper look to it, the Morse taper drill bit will not work in your standard chuck. And the same is true vice versa. A standard shank drill bit will not work in your Morse taper adapter. So the way these things operate, you have to make sure that you know the Morse taper chuck or the Morse taper shank is going in the Morse taper adapter, and you don't have any kind of weird combination there back and forth. The way you put this thing back in is really easy. All you do is you pull it back down, you look for your little slot here, you look for the little tooth in the top of the Morse taper shank. I'm going to slide this thing up, make sure it's in the slot, and you literally take it and you jam it back up in the slot. Now this thing, even though it seems like it's just a real simple fit, this thing actually holds really securely. Now, this may come out on you. Chances are it won't, but this may come out on you. If it does come out on you, if the chuck does fall out on you, don't worry. You can either just, first thing, turn the machine off, don't leave it running. Secondly, you can either come and get me, or you can try to reinsert it yourself. If you can't reinsert it yourself, then obviously come get me to make sure that we reinsert it correctly. But this thing, if it does fall out, don't worry, it happens, and then you just come and get me. The next thing I want to talk about is the actual table on the machine itself. This table is fully adjustable, meaning that we can actually adjust the table up and down and side to side. The way you do that is with a clamp on the back here. You can loosen this clamp, okay? And this allows us to turn the table side to side. It also allows us to adjust the table up, and down. When I'm done making my adjustment, I want to make sure I retighten my clamp in the back here. Okay, and now this thing's solid. The next thing I want to show you guys is the table itself actually does rotate. To adjust it, to rotate the table if I need to, I'll go underneath the table here, and you'll notice we actually have a secondary clamp right here. I will loosen this clamp, go the right direction with it. I'll loosen the clamp. Okay, and now I can actually turn my table as I need to. Make sure any adjustments that you make on your table settings are done with the drill off. Do not adjust your table or your rotation of your table with the drill running. You don't have to unplug it. This would be considered a minor adjustment. Also, this table does adjust for angles. You can tilt the table one way or another. The way you do that is you actually have an angle adjustment on the back here. And if you look, we actually have the adjustment for that right here. We have a set screw in the bottom of the table here that gets loosened, and it'll actually allow the table to be adjusted to the angle that we need it to. I'm not going to show that today, but I do want to show you guys that the table itself can be adjusted for angles. So we have full three-dimensional adjustability on the table itself. The next thing I want to talk about is when you put your material in. Oftentimes we'll be working with longer material. If you are working with longer material, you have to make sure the longer the material is always pointed out towards your left. The reason why is because the drill press turns in a clockwise direction. If you're operating with a long piece of material and it's going to your right, then that long material, if it were to get caught in the drill on the drill press, it can actually spin the material out and stick right into you. And that's the last thing you want to have happen, is have this thing come and nail you right in the side, or even worse, have this thing nail you right in the knuckles. I've had that happen to myself before. It doesn't feel good. You're going to get smashed in the knuckles by a piece of wood, or even worse, a piece of metal. So always make sure the material is always facing to your left. And the reason why is because if this thing gets caught in the drill press now, it's sticking out to your left, and when it spins around, it's going to spin around and hit the post in the back of the drill press here. It's not going to spin around and hit you. So that's what you want. You want it to spin around and hit the post. Now, if you're in a situation like this, where the clamp only holds this one direction, then you need to make sure that you position yourself in a way to where the longer the material is to your left. So in other words, don't stand directly in front of the material like this. Stand off to the side slightly so the material sticks out to the left of you. So that way, if for some reason the clamp doesn't hold the material down, if it would spin around, it would spin around and come hit the post itself. Okay? So make sure it sits in a place like that where it's not going to come around and hit you. The next thing I want to get into to talk about is actually a center punch versus a scribe. They look very similar, but they have different functions. A scribe is used for making marks on material. So we can see here I have material, and if I want to make my mark on it, I can use my scribe to scribe a line, scratch a line in my metal. And you can see here we have a nice line now for my scribe. A scribe does have a sharpened point to it, and the sharpened point is meant to scratch a line in your material. You'll then come back to the direction, and you can scratch a line going the other direction. So I'm going to line this thing up, scratch my line going the other direction. And now that gives us a center point right here. Hopefully you guys can see that, where I can then take my punch. I can use my punch on my center point here, line up my center point, take my hammer, and now I have a nice little divot for the drill bit to set in, okay? And this helps the drill bit to keep from walking across the material, because sometimes what can happen when you're drilling the material, the drill bit may have a tendency to walk one way or another, and you'll see what that looks like when you're operating the portable drill, even though it doesn't really happen with the drill press. Next thing I want to do is I want to put my material in the drill press. Base block down, and the reason why I want to put something underneath this is because what I don't want to do is I don't want to just set the material in the drill press clamp like this, because if I drill through this material as it sits right now, the drill bit will go through the material and it will go straight into the vise. And what we're going to have now is a whole bunch of holes all over the inside of this vise, causing a giant mess. So the last thing you want to have happen is this thing going through the material, sticking into the vise, drilling into the vise, and making a mess out of it. So make sure that you have a space underneath your material, and it's good practice to have just a spare chunk of wood under the material like this to space your project off of the clamp, the vise, so that way it doesn't just stick into the material below. Once your material's in, you will then tighten it down in the vise, and you can then get ready to put your drill bit in. So it doesn't really matter what order you go in here now, because if you want to put your drill bit in first, usually it's easier to do that. As you can see here, the drill bit doesn't quite have enough room, but if I open the jaws of the chuck up a little bit, I can now get my drill bit in a lot easier. One thing I want you to see here is sometimes it's possible to offset your drill bit. If you're not paying attention, you can insert your drill bit offset like this, and when you hit the start button, it's not centered, it's wobbling all over the place. We want to make sure that when we actually put the drill bit in, the drill bit is actually centered inside the drill chuck teeth, like this. Now when I turn this on, it's nice and straight and true, okay? Now that my drill bit is in, the next step I want to do is tighten up the chuck itself. Notice I have my chuck key on the side of the drill press right here. I'll remove the chuck key, and I will then tighten the drill chuck 3 times. Turn it to the first one, rotate it to the next one, and I'll rotate it to the next one. Now it was a nice tight fit. One thing I want you to notice with the chuck key, this chuck key is really slick because it has a spring-loaded remover on it. Not all chuck keys have this spring-loaded remover on it. What can happen is if this does not have a little spring-loaded remover on it, the chuck key can get stuck in the drill bit chuck. You never want to leave the chuck key in the chuck. The reason why is because one of 2 things can happen. The first thing that can happen is if you leave the chuck key in, then you go to turn the drill press on, it's going to spin around, and it's going to send the chuck flying across the shop. It's probably going to hit something or hit someone and cause the damage to someone else or damage to another project. So that's the first reason you don't want to leave the chuck key in there. The second reason you don't want to leave a chuck key in there is because if you're operating the drill press and you're bringing this down, there's a chance the chuck key can actually come all the way around and come back and impale you on your hand like this. So that can actually come all the way around. If your hand's in the path of this thing, it doesn't care if your hand's in the path of it or not. It's going to go straight through your hand. And I've actually seen this happen before. The chuck key has gone straight through someone's hand like this. So removing your chuck key from the drill bit chuck or the drill press chuck is vitally important to the safety of the drill press, because you have to make sure you remove this every single time. If you don't, bad things will happen. The next thing I want to bring up is actually setting up the speed of the drill press itself. I'm going to put the drill bit chuck key back in the hole here, and now I want to adjust for the speed of my drill press. So I am actually using a 13 30 seconds drill bit. Matter of fact, if I look on my index here, the drill bit I pulled out, it was from the back of the index right there, which indicates that it was a 13 30 seconds drill bit. I need to find about how big that size was. So the closest one I have, next size down on this chart here, is 3/8. So if I look at my chart here, I have 3/8, and I want to go in mild steel. My approximate RPM should be about 430. Now, since this is a little bit bigger than 3/8, I should probably run it closer to 360, probably closer to 7/16 actually. So I'll actually probably want to run this thing at about 360 for our 7/16. It's always better to err on the slower side. If you go slower, all that's going to do is reduce the speed of your drill bit. It's going to cause less friction and less wear on the drill bit in the long run. So always err on the slower side. So we're drilling in mild steel. We're using pretty close to 7/16 inch bit, and we want to drill at 360 RPMs. To adjust this drill press is a little bit different. It doesn't have one of the fancy auto adjusters in the front of it. To adjust it, we have to actually open it up and manually adjust the belts. To do that, we're going to open up the lid here, and we're going to see here we have 1, 2, 3 pulleys. Now on here, we can see that in the back of this, we have a variety of different setups that show belt locations for different pulleys. We can see here we wanted about 360 for our speed for our drill bit, which means we want to set up our belts to be about 350 here in the bottom of the belt setup for the pulleys. To adjust our belts, the way we'll do this is we have a tensioning lock nut on the back side of the drill press here that we're going to loosen. We're going to have the same one over here that we're going to loosen. Okay. This allows us to use this lever right here to loosen and tighten our motor on the back side of the drill press. The way we want to do this, we want to actually manually adjust our belt. So we can see here that in this situation, adjust that, there we go. This shows us this would actually be about a 200 RPM speed right here, and we want 350. So we actually want to go back to the way we had it right there. So I'm going to adjust the belt back down. I'm going to adjust this one back down there. Now this is still loose, so we want to make sure we tighten this back up before we're done. So we're going to grab a hold of the lever here. We're going to tighten the lever, push the motor back out. We're then going to want to tighten the lock screw on each side there, the lock screw on this side here. Now our belt's tight. If we're to run this, you can see the pulleys are turning smoothly and evenly. Nothing's adjusted weird, so we're good to go. Okay. Now we are ready to drill our hole. The last thing we want to do before we actually start drilling is we want to, one, adjust our cross feed vise. So we can see here we want to have our little mark right there, so we'll adjust it that way. Bring this down, take a look at it. And the last thing before we actually start drilling is we want to use cutting fluid. Now, if you don't have some sort of cutting fluid, WD-40 works great. What this does is this lubricates the drill bit during the cutting process, which does two things. One, it creates a better hole, a smoother hole. Two, it keeps the drill bit nice and cool during the cutting process. So I just want to put a little bit of WD-40 on here, not a ton, just a little bit, like that. And now I'm ready to start drilling. So last thing I want to do, take my gloves off since we don't want to operate the drill press with our gloves on. Turn the drill press on. Slowly bring the drill bit down, and we pull on it ever so slightly. Don't pull on it really hard. If you pull on it really hard, you're going to cause damage to the machine. And you're just going to slowly pull this down like this. You'll see smoke coming off it. That's okay. That's just the cutting fluid being used up during the cutting process, which is perfectly normal. If you stop seeing smoke, then it's probably a little too hot. You want to look for little long strings like that. If you get long strings out of this, that's good. Now we can see we're starting to get a little bit hotter, getting less smoke. So I'm going to take this back up, turn it off. I'm going to put some more WD in there. We start the drilling process. And we get this nice long cut, which is what we're looking for, like that nice big long that just came off. We're going to go through like this. And notice we'll see all the way through. We're going to hit wood. Okay? And you'll see when we come through, now hit wood, and that's what we're looking for. We don't want to go any further. I'm going to stop the drill press. Now we've stopped it, we can handle our material safely with our gloves again. So we want to dispose of any shavings properly. So we're going to loosen the drill press. Loosen the vise. We're going to take our material back out. We're going to dump any shavings that we may have in the garbage. Like that. Okay. And then we're ready to clean up the drill press now that we're done. So now that we're done, we want to take our drill bit back out so no one else is stuck with our material when we're done. The drill press, drill bit back out. Okay. The drill bit back where it came from. Clean up any shavings, clean up any material. Once that's done, then you are set to go for the next project and next person. Okay. Make sure you clean up any messes. If you have any oil left on there, make sure you have any oil. Don't leave any oil left sitting out on it. All right, guys, that's a drill press. I hope you enjoyed it. And that's it for a little demo today.